Dusk at Persepolis. The last light is going orange across the plain, and the great stone stairways are throwing long shadows east. 2,500 years ago, these steps were crowded, envoys from 23 nations climbing them in single file, carrying gold, carrying lions, carrying tribute to a king who called himself King of Kings. Ethiopians and Indians and Greeks and Scythians carved into the stone in a procession that still hasn't ended, because the stone kept walking long after the men turned to dust. Now the plain is silent. A wind moves through the broken columns, and if you could reach down into the ground beneath those stairs, under the ash, under the fire that Alexander set here in 330 BC, under the bones, and pull out the DNA of the people who built this place, you'd be holding the answer to a question that has driven scholars quietly insane for 2 centuries. Who exactly are the Persians? Not the empire, not the poetry, the people, the living, breathing population that speaks Farsi today from Tehran to Los Angeles. Where does their blood actually begin? So they did it. Scientists took modern Iranian genomes and compared them against every major population on Earth, and against the ancient dead, the farmers and herders and hunters we've pulled out of the ground across the whole of West Asia. They were looking for the source, and one result stopped them cold. Because it turned out the Persians aren't descended from some famous conqueror or some borrowed people. They are sitting on top of one of the 4 oldest foundation stones of the entire human world, a lineage so ancient and so important that half the planet is partly built out of it, and almost nobody knows its name. Let me take you back to find it. We're going to travel down through time, one layer at a time, like sinking through the floors of a building, all the way to the bedrock. Watch each floor as we pass it. First floor down. Go back before the poets, before Rumi, before Hafiz, before the gardens and the nightingales. 2,500 years, to the men climbing those stairs at Persepolis. This is the Achaemenid Empire, the first true world empire, stretching from the edge of Greece to the edge of India. And here's the first thing the DNA quietly corrects. The temptation is to imagine the Persians rode in from somewhere else and conquered this land. They didn't arrive as strangers. By the time Cyrus founded the empire, the Iranian-speaking peoples had already been on this plateau for a very long time, blended into populations that had lived here for thousands of years before them. The empire wasn't an import. It was an eruption of something that was already deeply rooted in the soil. Keep going down. Second floor. The Bronze Age. Now the great stone palaces vanish, and we're among herders and horse people. Around 4,000 years ago, riders come down off the Eurasian steppe carrying a language, the Indo-Iranian tongue that will eventually become Persian and Kurdish and the languages of northern India, and that shares a distant grandmother with Greek and Latin and English. These steppe herders are real, and they leave a real mark in the genome. But, and the DNA is insistent on this, they did not empty the land and refill it with themselves. They layered onto a population that was already here. They are a floor. They are not the foundation. Keep going down. Past the herders. Past the language. Down to the bedrock. And here, 9,000 years ago, on this same plateau, at a place called Ganj Dareh in the Zagros mountains, we find them, the people the whole story has been sinking toward, the early Iranian farmers, the foundation stone. You need to understand who these people were, because this is the result that stunned everyone, and it's the heart of everything. When geneticists map the deep ancestry of all of West Eurasia, everyone from Ireland to India, they found it wasn't built from one source or two. It was built from a small handful of ancient founding populations that mixed and remixed across 10,000 years. This is the landmark work of Lazaridis and colleagues, published in Nature in 2016, and it's one of the most important things human genetics has ever produced. And one of those founding populations, one of the true cornerstones of the modern West Eurasian world, was the ancient farmers of the Iranian plateau, the people of Ganj Dareh, a lineage that had been sitting on this land, distinct and deep, since the last ice age was barely over. Now hold that thought and let it land properly. Modern Persians are not a young people who borrowed an old land. Modern Persians are, to an unusual and striking degree, the living continuation of one of the 4 or 5 ancestral foundations of half the human species. That deep Iranian farmer signature, the Ganj Dareh bedrock, still runs powerfully through the Iranian genome today, thousands of years and a dozen empires and countless invasions later. The steppe herders came, The Arabs came, the Mongols came, Turkic dynasties came, and through all of it, the bedrock held. That's the stunning result. Not that the Persians are exotic, that they are foundational. When a French person or a German or a Pakistani carries a slice of Iranian-related ancestry in their DNA readout, and enormous numbers of people do, they are carrying a fragment of the same ancient plateau that the Persians never had to borrow because they were standing on it the whole time. If watching history sink down to its bedrock like this is the kind of thing you want more of, then subscribe. Not for the algorithm. Because there's a version of this descent for every people on Earth. A floor you can drop through until you hit the foundation. And you're going to want to be here when we take the elevator down again. Now let's come back up through the floors, because the return trip has its own revelations. Rise from the bedrock, back up past the steppe herders, and stop at a floor we skipped on the way down. Because there's a room here that almost got sealed forever. And it's one of the most moving stories in all of population genetics. When the Arab conquest swept across Iran in the 7th century, and Islam spread across the plateau, a community of Zoroastrians, the followers of the old Persian faith, the fire keepers, refused to convert. Some of them left. They sailed to the coast of India and became the Parsis, and for over 1,000 years they lived there as a tiny, closed community, marrying almost entirely among themselves. And because they closed the door so tightly, they preserved something. When scientists sequenced the Parsis, work by Lopez and colleagues in 2017, they found a population that still carries the genetic signature of the ancient Iranians who left, a living time capsule of pre-Islamic Persia, sealed in India for 1,000 years, and only now opened by DNA. The old Persia didn't fully vanish. A piece of it sailed away and kept itself, like a seed carried out of a burning house. Keep rising, up to our own floor, the present. And this is where the whole descent pays off, because now you understand what a modern Iranian genome actually is. It is not one thing. It's the whole building at once. The Ganj Dareh bedrock at the bottom, the steppe herders layered above, the traces of every empire that ever crossed the plateau woven through the upper floors, all standing on a foundation that predates every single one of them. A Persian isn't a page of history. A Persian is the whole book, still bound together, still being read. So come back with me to Persepolis one last time. It's full dark now, the columns are just black shapes against the stars, and the carved procession of 23 nations is climbing a staircase it will never finish. Alexander burned this place. Empires rose here and fell here, and were buried here. And for 2 centuries, scholars stood in these ruins, asking where the people who built them came from, as if the answer had been lost in the fire. But it was never lost. It was in the ground the whole time, and it was in the blood the whole time. A lineage older than the empire, older than the language, older than the fire that tried to end it. One of the founding stones of the human world, still holding up a living people who never had to look anywhere else for a home, because they were already standing on the deepest floor there is. That's the thing about DNA. It doesn't burn. It doesn't fall with the empire. It just waits in the ground, patient as bedrock, until someone finally thinks to ask it who was really here. And then it tells you the truth was always older and always closer to home than anyone dared to guess. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.